Today I'm speaking with a friend named Brittany Chavez. Brittany, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tim. Very good to be here with you today.
Did I pronounce that, by the way, correctly? Is it Chavez or Chavez?
Chavez.
Chavez, I apologize. Brittany Chavez. And Brittany is a doula and a student midwife, as well as an educator. She is a mother. She has a large family. And she is on a mission to study midwifery and to provide caring, competent, and caring maternity services that honor the life, essence, spirit, and body, of mothers and birth givers in the community. She spends a lot of time educating and supporting the community through Facebook groups and various education methods. She enjoys helping people move through life with intention and passion. And Brittany, could you just tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you're up to in life these days?
Yeah, sure. So I am spending a lot of time just working on being creative and pushing out a lot of content and having fun. I've spent a lot of my earlier time working, and so right now I'm trying to balance my life between really like being a mother, figuring out how to live with a pandemic and school my kids at home, but also really focusing on those creative interests and being able to just like push out blogs and to talk to people and to get my message out and really to help people.
How's homeschooling going with COVID?
Wow.
Overwhelming?
It's very difficult. There's a lot of technological barriers, and I thought that I was good with technology, but now I have to run like 75 different programs with 4 different kids, and they all have different devices. So there's a lot to tackle with that.
Yeah. And what ages are they?
My youngest is 5, and then I have a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 9-year-old.
Okay, gotcha. So your kids are staggered a little bit older than ours. We have 4 children, but they're all currently under age 6. So it feels a little bit more like romper room at the moment. But they're adorable. They're wonderful. I love every minute of it. But they're a handful, but I love it. Could you tell us a little bit more then, going on to the main theme of why we're chatting? Tell us more about your background. Like what was your background like, just in general, but then also with religious stuff? Where did you come from religiously?
So growing up, I was traditional Roman Catholic. I belonged to a sect called the Society of St. Pius X, and they are a Catholic traditionalist radical group that is not even governed by Rome. So like even the
Okay.
Pope doesn't want anything to do with these people.
I don't think I've ever heard of this group. Are they
Yeah,
worldwide or just in the US?
I'm pretty sure they're worldwide, and they do have little missions and chapels all over the world.
Hmm. And what would you say is distinctive for them versus mainstream Catholic beliefs?
So I feel like mainstream Catholics are a little bit more wiggly in their beliefs. And you talk to one Catholic and they hold this belief, and you talk to this Catholic and they hold this belief. And it's just like there's a variance. With
Hmm.
the traditional Roman Catholics and the sect that I belong to, they're very like, I use the word culty, but they have very strong, almost like fundamentalist beliefs. And so the mass, like the actual ritual that they partake in, is like all done in Latin, and all the women have to cover their
Well,
heads. You have to wear a skirt that's like so long if you're a woman. And then, of course, all the other kind of weird Catholic beliefs are really impressed on people. Like you're not allowed to use birth control. You can't use contraceptives at all. You're supposed to have as many kids as you possibly can. And kind of more of those like social beliefs that are etched in there with the I don't know, religious stuff.
do they still have a priest like for confession and things like that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the other source of contention for me too, is you can't just be like a regular Catholic if you belong to this sect. And they even go as far to say that like if you have a marriage that is blessed or whatever performed by a priest from the Catholics that are following Rome and the Pope, it's not a valid marriage and it's not a valid sacrament or whatever. So they're like really, like I said, like fundamentalist is a very good description for that group.
And were both of your parents in that, or just
Yes.
one? Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think that growing up, my stepdad really, I feel like he didn't have very strong held religious beliefs. But my mom is a very strong character. And so she was kind of the guiding light in the family and the person who made sure everybody said the rosary every day, went to
Hmm.
church, went to confession, all that kind of stuff.
So do you still know the Latin, and could you read the Latin book still?
So I did go to Catholic school for 1 year, thank God, only 1 year. And I took some Latin there, and it's been helpful in my journey as a healthcare provider because there is a lot of Latin involved with that.
Sure.
I cannot speak Latin. I know like a couple prayers and blessings, but I am not fluent or anything like that.
That's great, though. It is a good, I mean, if you're going to learn any of the Romance languages and so forth, it's a great background. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you, what's the sect called again?
Society of St. Pius X.
Society of St. Pius X. Wow, it's a long name. What was, just, I don't want to take us too far off of our focus, which is on your journey, but just out of curiosity, who was St. Pius X, if you know, and what was it that he did that made people want to follow him with his name in their sect?
I couldn't tell you if I'm being quite honest. I know that before St. Pius X, he was a pope. So before he was pope,
Okay.
Children under a certain age couldn't take communion in a lot of the sacraments. So with Catholicism, like I said, there's a lot of this social structure that's impressed and kind of commingled with the religious aspects of, their belief system. And so there is this kind of idea that if you are a child and you die before you're able to receive some of those sacraments, then possibly your soul can go to hell or go to, somewhere else other than heaven. So I know that St. Pius X made the age where you can receive communion a lot lower. I think it was like around 14 and he changed it to 7 or something like that. I'm not really sure why they chose him as like the dude.
Yeah, the patron. I'll have to look that up. I love hearing stuff like that because, I do a lot of studying. I have a lot of people that send me stuff and I'm always seeing interesting things, but most of the things at this point I've kind of heard a little bit about, but it's like more just like digging deeper into the same subject, to a much greater depth. But that's one I've never heard before, so I'll have to look that up. That's really interesting. So with your parents, your parents both went, your mom was more serious about it. What did you feel like you were experiencing? Like, what I mean is, were you experiencing this as a religion where it's just like ritual, or did you feel like you were actually praying to God? Did you feel like there was a relationship there, or how did that come across to you, especially as a child?
When I was a very small child, I don't think I had a concept of like God, and I knew that we were doing these things, and I knew that I had to be quiet if we were at church. I wasn't allowed to speak. And then kind of like around the age 7, we start doing, catechism classes and that kind of thing. So they really start teaching you about the religion, about the faith, and they start preparing you to make your first confession, to take your first communion, that kind of thing. And so that's when I started to get more of like an idea about what it is that we did every Sunday. And so I don't know exactly if that's like everybody's experience or if it's just the way I was brought up, but I don't feel like my mom really talked about the religion. It was kind of like, this is what we do. And there wasn't much explanation to it. It was just like, you better behave.
Yeah.
And then I guess as I got older, like I did feel some sort of connection, but I'm not really sure what that connection is. I really think that it's more like the act of being intentional and the act of having a ritual, and it's not so much the connection to God or this otherworldly being. Yeah.
Did that ever, at any point, at any age, come into the equation where you just felt like you were actually talking to God in some kind of personal way, or did that never really come in?
So when I was 14, I started to think about the religion a lot differently. And I started to pick up like very basic meditation skills, I would say. So I don't know. I never felt like I talked to God or like God talked to me. And I kind of was a little bit jealous because I feel like a lot of the people I knew as Christian, growing up, they had these conversations and they're like, the Holy Spirit told me this and God, Jesus told me this. And I'm like, they don't ever tell me anything. So is there something wrong with me or what? But I do feel like I developed this like deeper connection to self around that age. But no, I've never had anybody reach out from the clouds and
When you're saying that resonates with me a lot too. I'm from a Protestant background, but I'd say absolutely ditto to mine. I had people, in fact, I had one at one point I was doing an internship at the church for Bible, because as part of a requirement for Bible college. I went to school to be a minister, and one of the elders, he just really nice guy. I mean, heart of gold, lovely man. But he said, "Tell me, what is God saying to you?" And you could hear like this. He would like almost like get into like the deep breath, like, "What is God saying to you?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I know his Bible is his love letter to us, so he's he's kind of speaking to me through his word." He's like, "No, no, no, no. What is he saying to you?" And like he kept on digging and asking in different ways, and I was like, if I'm understanding it correctly, if I understand your question correctly, he's not speaking to me at all. If the way you're describing, I'm like, and he was like, "Yeah, we need to work on this. God isn't speaking to you." And I was like, okay. So I've definitely seen some of that up front. That wasn't as common. That's probably more common in a Pentecostal or at least charismatic background for evangelical Christians, Protestants, but there were some people in my background that had that kind of experience. Can you tell me, you mentioned the word catechism. For anyone who doesn't know, and most people probably do, but for anyone who doesn't know, what is that? And how far did you go with that?
Oh, geez. So there's a book called Baltimore Catechism, and I don't know how many volumes there are. I know that I studied the first like 3 volumes of it. And so they have these questions, and you have to, so they'll give you a question and you have to answer with the specific answer. It can't be, the answer that comes to you or whatever comes to the top of your head. You have to memorize what the answer is. And so like it's in my brain fibers. So I know it's like the first question is, who is God? God is love. And what does God want for us? God wants us to live a life, to know him, and to go to heaven. So like, it's this like memorization of questions and answers about the faith and it has different prayers and things like that. But these are things that you're expected to know before you do that first confession, or before you receive that first communion, because it's imperative that you have or understand the tenets of the faith, and that you're able to be worthy or to accept those sacraments in a way that's pleasing to those rites and rituals.
It's kind of like a form of indoctrination in a sense, not to get into the negativity of that, although we will be getting into that. But I didn't grow up in the catechism world, but as I grew up and began to kind of formulate my beliefs further and further until I deconverted last year, but I became much more focused on a Calvinistic perspective. You know what Calvinism is?
Yes. Yeah.
And I know in groups and churches that are very Calvinistic, I believe it's the Westminster Confession or the Shorter Confession is instilled in children. And of course, parents, even if they don't send their kids to a school that would do it, or a church, a lot of parents would just do it at home with them, at least on some level. And I know now these days, there's YouTube songs where you just play it for the kids, and it kind of drills into their head by virtue of it being a cute little song. But it's a way of it's basically a way of taking all the disjointedness of certain topics that you get in the Bible. Like if you say, let's just study this subject where you have to go to different verses, it kind of puts it all together in a very short summary and a question answer, so that kids and adults can have a very easy way to grasp what the church believes. Just out of curiosity, go ahead.
So the point that I was going to make is that they give you these questions and answers that you have to memorize, these prayers and that kind of thing. But there's also this pain of hell if you don't memorize it, or if you don't get it just right or just perfect. Because there are certain things that you have to memorize and recite, and like the priest would quiz you and make sure that you pass or whatever, so that you can be worthy enough to take that first confession or the first communion. So it's like you have to memorize this stuff. It has to be perfect. It has to be exact, or else you can't get the sacraments, and you might die and go to hell, because after you reach a certain age, you have to be, practicing, and you have to have all these sacraments and these things. And if you don't, then that's the end of you, for all eternity, you'll burn.
Is the thought just that you won't be right with God, or that there's going to be like a test after you die, or like at what point does it become like you're okay, but but hell is like a path you might end up being on, or is like an actual threat, like, no, you're on the way to path to hell right now because of this? Like, where does the threat become very, very specific and personal?
So part of the Catholicism and the catechism classes is teaching people that there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church,
Hmm.
which means that if you don't regularly receive the sacraments, if you don't go to church every Sunday and on holy days of obligation, then you're damned.
Hmm. It's amazing. I
Yeah,
want to
which
dive
is
into
a
that
real
more
scary
shortly.
concept for kids.
Yeah. Do they, and I apologize for some of my questions I know the answer to, some of them I think I know the answer to, I just want to be sure, but Catholics would believe in a literal conscious torment, like a real burning place. Is that correct?
Yeah, from my understanding, they have different levels of hell, and if you do certain sins, then you go to one place or the other. But it's all this horrible, torment where it's an eternity without the presence of God, and where you have, burns and torture and fire and brimstone and that kind of thing. And those were, very real stories that were impressed upon me as a child. So, I grew up with this idea that if I didn't memorize all these prayers, if I didn't know all these things, if I didn't practice, if I wasn't quiet when I went to church, if I was disrespectful or said something out of turn to my mother, that I would suffer for all of eternity. So that's a lot of pressure to put on a young mind.
It is, especially when you're not really giving them, and we'll go into this too later, but you're not really giving them the full information of where that came from,
Yeah.
and the ability to question if it's really true or not. Um, do they? Another question about hell. Do they talk about purgatory at all?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think that with Catholicism, the purgatory thing is very, yeah, it's a very big important part of doctrine. And so from my understanding, if I can remember correctly, it's been a couple years, but if you die and you have a mortal sin on your soul, then you go straight to hell. Do not pass go. But if
Okay.
you die and you haven't repented for your sins that you've already confessed at the confession box, then you'll go to purgatory, and you have to spend so many years
Okay.
in there
So it's like the
before
people
you
that
can go to heaven.
the people that are truly awful, they don't have a shot at getting out. But the people that are pretty good people, but just have some issues to deal with between them and God kind of puts them in a penalty box for a little bit before they go into heaven, it sounds like.
Sort of.
Sort of.
But like, so you have a mortal sin on your soul every time you commit some sort of mortal sin, which is like breaking the 10 commandments, any of
Okay.
them.
So murder,
And
adultery.
so, yeah. So the way that you get those mortal sins off of your soul is to go to confession. And so you're supposed to make regular confessions, because if you die and you haven't gone to confession and you have committed one of these mortal sins, then you go to hell, even if you were a good practicing Catholic for most of your life. So there is this fear of, always doing the right thing, or whatever, the religion says is the right thing. And then furthermore, always confessing your sins. And if you don't, or if you forget one, then you're going to go to hell.
Now, do you pray to, or when you were in that, did you pray to saints as well, or just to God?
So I prayed to saints, but I'm told that that's not what you're supposed to do.
Okay. Do you pray to, well, you pray to Mary, right? Sort
Yep.
of? Okay.
Sort of, yeah. So they call her like an intercessor or a mediatrix. And so one of the saints wrote about the relationship between people on earth and Mary and God. And they said that people on earth are so unworthy that they should never like present their case to God, because it would be like us, giving a wormy apple to the divine deity. But if we were to present this wormy apple, which is the best that we could possibly as unworthy humans present, to the mother of God, then she could prepare the wormy apple and make it pleasing and present it to her son. And then that way she's our mediatrix to make us more worthy, or to have some sort of divine intercession to make us better in the eyes of the divine.
It's amazing. I will admit I don't know anywhere near as much about Catholicism as I would like to, and it's fascinating. It's interesting to be. I was neck deep, and I'll tell you my story another time where you can watch my videos. But I was neck deep in my religion, which is a Protestant evangelical Christianity. And of course, when you're in it, it's not a religion; it's a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
But just to put it in a simpler sense, a religion. But it sounds like there's some uniquenesses that, to be honest, just from a first glance, they sound a little bit scarier as a kid. I mean, like as an evangelical, you're given more of a Jesus loves me, this I know kind of perspective of it's just love, love, love. And there's kind of the threat of hell, but I mean, I think a lot of evangelical Protestant churches are they're not necessarily softening on it on a purely like a doctrinal statement level, but in terms of the way they preach it, like you can have a rule book, but not really apply it, And it's kind
Yeah.
of like we have a rule book that says there is a place called hell, you're going to burn there, but we're not really going to talk about it that much. And when we do talk about it, we're going to talk more about, let's not talk about hell, let's just talk about how to get you out of it. But it's like,
Yeah.
but the reality is, the implication is, if you don't follow our our call to believe and to repent, you are still going to end up there, and you are going to actually be tortured.
Yeah.
Did you ever have those kind of conversations with friends or family or anyone and say, does this sound right? Did that ever come up?
Yes. So one of my very best friends, my childhood friends, who are still friends to this day, she was raised Catholic, but like regular Catholic, not like the fundamentalist Catholic. So we did have a lot of conversations growing up. And it was, I think, like a shared fear that we had between us, that if we don't do the right thing, or even, sometimes if we talk about or talk to other friends who are not Catholic, then maybe we'll, fall or be unworthy in some way. And I definitely did have conversations with my family growing up, but I feel like generally I was just told, like, almost like a cop out. Like, if you don't listen or if you question, you don't have enough faith and you'll go to hell. So it's always like this, like dichotomy, either you believe or you burn, and there's no room for questioning. And if you question, then you just keep going through the motions until that faith comes back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. That was very true of my situation too. If you have a doubt, the answer was you need more faith. Or if it's just a question of like, I'm questioning this verse or this passage, what was God doing? It doesn't sound right. It was always like, well, you just don't really understand either what God's actually saying in the passage. Like, maybe if you study and go to Bible college more or seminary, you'll get a deeper understanding of the Hebrew and the Greek and the historical background, the context, and that will make sense. Or it'll be like, so, these guys are just master apologists that they just know, they've been Christians for 50, 60 years. They have answers. You just need to read some good books from Christian masters, so to speak. Or the clinchers that would be, no one knows, but God will tell us in heaven. Or, of course, the other one that's a little bit more humbling, so to speak, is just to say, why are you questioning God? Like, how can you, what are you doing presuming that you know better than God? God created you. You can't fight against him. You can't argue against him. And they kind of find these ways to always kind of put you in your place if you're not otherwise already predisposed to do that.
Right.
Did you?
And that place is unworthy. That's what it comes down to, is that you as a human are infinitely unworthy and you need to be saved. And they have the remedy, they have the medicine to save you.
Yeah. So I've got a little bug here going at me. Do you, just for a baseline, when I talk to most of my interviews, if they're with a Christian, they're usually with someone who came from a similar enough background that when I say what I'm about to say, they're like, yeah, that's what I believe or did believe. I'm just curious if you would agree with this. And I don't think you would. I think you'd clarify it a little bit. The gospel, meaning the good news of salvation, from a Protestant perspective, is that you are dead in your sins. You no matter what you do, your righteousness is as a filthy rag. You cannot please God in any way. You're born in sin, dead, and then on top of being born, because you're born in Adam and Eve, you not only inherit this sinfulness, but you then add to it by doing sin. Like, you're actually yourself. Like, even if Adam and Eve had never sinned, you would have messed it up for everybody, because you're a sinner, because you're just weak. You're not like God. You're not holy. You fall short of his glory. And so there's this bad news part, combined with the hell we just talked about. You're not only bad, but you're deserving punishment, which is coming. And pretty much in a judicial sense, you're already condemned. The punishment just hasn't been applied yet. So you're kind of, dangling, as it were, over hell, apart from a great, wonderful, salvific graciousness act of God. But the good news, of course, is that Jesus was the perfect substitute, just like in the Old Testament, that they would sacrifice the lambs, and that God said, I need the lamb of a perfect sheep to create atonement, forgiveness for sin, and that Jesus is the final one, the final perfect lamb, and that his death is what covers us. He took our death, and that his resurrection was kind of the example of what we get pulled into, in a sense of we get to inherit. We get the covering that he did with his death, and we get to inherit his resurrection, so that he becomes the person that kind of goes before us, does the resurrection, and because we identify with him, we get to be resurrected too. that puts us obviously in a right relationship with God, but the gospel message being, we contribute nothing. There's nothing you do that's good. You just have to believe it. That's the evangelical gospel. It was my bread and butter for 40 years as a Protestant. Is it correct that Catholics would say pretty close, but good works, you have to have the good works to seal the deal? Is that how you would see it?
Yes, I think that it's very similar. But the only other thing is, my understanding of a lot of Protestants is that, like, if you claim salvation or claim that you have the faith or claim that you're saved, then you can be saved. And it's not that simple with Catholics. With Catholics, you have to perform the ritual. You have to be baptized. And so this led me, even as a child, like, through this really terrible, like, horrible field of emotions where it's like, well, what happens if a baby dies and the baby wasn't baptized? Does that baby go to hell? Where does that baby's soul go? Or what happens to, people in some other country who don't know about Christians and Catholicism, if there's no salvation outside of the Catholic Church? So what happens to their souls? They can't simply just be saved by being good people. They have to have this baptism ritual. So they
don't
really
believe babies just automatically go to heaven?
No, not from my understanding. There's no agreement, and I don't think there's any official Rome teaching. So some people believe that babies go to this place called limbo, which is not heaven or hell. It's nothing. And other people believe maybe babies go to hell, but a lot of people believe that because those children were not baptized, that they don't get to be reunited with their family after everybody passes and go to heaven. So,
pardon me for saying it, but what a mind job to do to a parent that's lost a baby.
Yeah.
To a sibling. Imagine being a 4-year-old, and if you understand enough of it, your little, older or younger brother or sister dies, and you think, the priest just told me I'm never going to see him again.
Yeah.
What a mind job.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the other side of that is that if you've lost a family member, especially a baby, and, maybe on the off chance somebody told you, oh yeah, they're in heaven, you'll see them in heaven someday, then it puts this like crazy amount of stress, especially on a young mind, saying like, okay, well, I have to be good for the rest of my life. I always have to follow the 10 commandments, always have to listen to mom and dad. And if I don't, I might go to hell, and then I'll never see my loved one again who passed away.
So it sounds like from what you just said that there's very little security. Like, you can't say, I got saved at, age 16 or something, and now I'm saved. Like, I'm saved. You can kind of, I don't know, put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you kind of flip in and out of that status. Is that correct?
Yeah. You have to continually go to confession. You have to continually take the sacraments. It's a continual practice of ritual. And if you're not practicing, then, you don't meet those conditions for heaven.
And not to take advantage of an easy jab, but I'd imagine that they would like you to give some money during your frequent visits. So.
Yeah, I mean, they always pass the collections around, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I want to ask about this. This is related to something you wrote, the idea of peace.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk quite yet about what happened after your deconversion, but did you have, like, what kind of peace did you have? Did you have any kind of, like, we've kind of been a little bit sarcastic about our experiences, but like, what was the good part of it? Like, what felt happy to you? What felt peaceful? What were the good days like in Catholicism?
So as an adult practicing in Catholicism, I had left as a kid and I went back as an adult. So it's kind of a big, complicated story. But as an adult, the peace that I got was participating in the ritual, was listening to the chants and the music and the smoke and the candles and all that really beautiful stuff, the stuff that's pleasing to the senses to be around, and to say like, wow, there's a group of like 100 people in this chapel. We're all here for the same purpose. We're all doing the same thing. And it's just really beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And it's a marvel to be a part of like a production like that happens the same way every week. And we're all participating. We all know what's going to happen next. And there is a weird kind of comfort in that community and in that ability to be with people and to perform ritual. But there wasn't much peace aside from that, because there's always that fear that if I don't confess something, or if I say the wrong thing, or, somebody cuts me off in traffic and I get angry, am I going to go to hell for that if I, pass away?
Did you ever, on that note, have conversations with evangelical Protestants who would, I mean, if I had met you back at that point and we were able to have an honest conversation about that, and you had said, yeah, I don't really have peace, the answer I would have given you at that point is, there's no way you could have peace, because what you're doing is you're trying to add to Jesus's finished work. Like, it's like saying, I had a debt for $1 million, and Jesus came in and he paid the $1 million, and then he gave you $1 million on top of it. You are fully paid up, and it's like you come in with your little nickel and your penny, and you say, but I want to keep paying. And as a Christian, as a Protestant, I would have said, you're never going to have peace. You're trying to pay something that's already been paid for. You're trying to add to the finished work of Christ, his grace. It's Christ alone, through faith alone, his finished work alone on the cross. His blood alone saves us. Yeah. And so I would have kind of attacked that position and said, of course you can't have peace. Did you ever have those conversations with Protestants?
Oh, sure. And I felt like I had to save them.
Really? So it went both ways.
Sure. So like
they had to save you, you had to save them.
Oh yeah, for sure. Which you can have a great, meaningful conversation when everybody's trying to save everybody. But so a lot of the evangelicals or Protestants that I had talked to, they did have this idea that what I was practicing was like way too much. They would use the word rigid. They would say things like, that is too rigid. That is not what I believe. I think we believe in a totally different, like, are you even Christian? I'm like, sure, I believe in Jesus. That's Christian, right? So yeah, we definitely did have conversations like that. But I did feel obligated. I mean, because that's another part of being a Catholic. People who are on the earth who are Catholic, they're called the church militant, which means that you have to be a militant Catholic. You have to share your beliefs. You have to save everybody. You have to pray for your friends who are not Catholic or who are living in sin. And by not sharing your beliefs with them, you're committing a sin as well, because you're spiritually responsible for your community. You're responsible for your friends and for your family. And so if you allow people to live in sin and you don't, confront them on that, then that's your bad. That is another, instance where you might go to hell because you have allowed this other person to not hear about, the Catholic faith. And again, there's no salvation outside the Catholic faith. So even if your friend is great and they're a Christian, they believe in God, it doesn't matter because they're not a practicing Catholic. And so you have to always be sharing this ritual and this kind of, I don't even know, these works with everyone in your community.
Now, did other Catholics try to have similar conversations with you who were not of that sect that you were in, where they would say you need to, bow your knee to Rome, you need to listen to the Pope? Was that those kind of okay? Was that ever something?
I'm sure that like the other Catholics that I've known or did know in that time of my life, they were like, they're crazy and I'm not going to argue. Like, this is what they do. It's really weird. It's rigid. It's in Latin, not about it, but I'm just going to leave you over there in the corner.
Gotcha. So at this point, we've talked around a lot of subjects, but let's bring it back to your specific story. You mentioned that you had been exposed to it as a child and I think you said you'd left, and then you came back to it. What caused you to leave, or whatever that would look like? And then how long was that, and what brought you to start to reconsider it and bring you back? And how long did you stay in it once you were back in it?
So when I was about 14, I just didn't believe anymore. I had spent 7 years practicing at that time, because you start doing your catechism stuff at 7. At 14, I was in the 8th grade, and I went to a traditional Roman Catholic school. And they were very open about history. They were very open about the way things happened and transpired. And so we had conversations about conquistadors and cristeros coming over from Spain to Mesoamerica and, essentially killing and claiming the indigenous lands and the people and committing cultural genocide and doing it in the name of God. And that these acts, doesn't matter how horrific that they were, these acts were justified because, those people, they were just stupid anyways, and they needed salvation. So it was better for them to die than for them to continue living in the sin of their indigenous religion. And, even at 14 years old, I just thought it was absolutely horrific. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing from the history teacher. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, you mean you just came over to somebody else's house and like murdered everybody? And they're like, yeah, man, but it's okay. Cause like we're Catholics and we're just, we're spreading the good word. And I just couldn't do it anymore, because at that point I realized like there cannot be a loving God that approves of genocide and murder. Like, it didn't match in my paradigm. So I had a lot of this, like, almost like cognitive dissonance, where you are fighting with yourself and you're like, is what I have been taught to believe really true? Because it doesn't match up with my feelings and what I believe a loving God would be like. So I would say that is really the big, thing that propelled me away from that way of thought. And so I stopped going to church. I stopped participating when we did family rosaries. I didn't listen when my mom read Catholic books. And that was the reason why. I no longer believe that there could be this loving entity that loved me so much, but not Indigenous people.
Real quick, before you tell about how you got back in, I'm just curious about the genocide thing you were just pointing out. Were you thinking also about the genocide that's in the Old Testament, that's in the Bible, or was that something that you hadn't really thought through yet at that point?
No.
It was more just
We
history.
didn't really learn a lot about Old Testament, if I'm being
Okay.
totally honest. They did
Sure.
a lot of New Testament, gospel, apocalypse, that kind of thing. But there wasn't a lot of talk of Old Testament. And I don't really know, again, if that's just my upbringing in the way that my churches were, or if that's like a unilateral thing with SSPX. I'm not certain.
Gotcha. I was just curious. It's something that I had been exposed to in the sense that I knew it happened, but for some reason, it really didn't stand out to me. And I say that to my shame, but I know other Christians who said, oh yeah, it stood out to me a long time, and I always was uncomfortable with it. And then it did deconvert. It became part of that deconversion story. I didn't like the genocide, therefore they started down that road. But for some reason, for me, it wasn't a big issue. It's kind of, I think I chalked it up to, if God's in charge, if he's the king, he can do what he wants. Yeah, so it's like, if there's a bunch of fire ants out back in your yard, you're afraid that your kids are going to step on them and get fire ants all over. Would you really hesitate to go out there with a can of something and kill them? Well, no, you wouldn't, because they're ants. It's like, well, the distance between us and the ants, if it's this big, the difference between us and God is like much higher. So of course God has the right to do what he wants. We're ants and smaller to him. And so it was always just like he's in charge. Of course he can do what he wants. But now, what I'm curious here, what brought you back? Because that's a really fascinating dynamic, to see someone leave and then go back to it.
Manipulation.
Okay.
So I had one child and I was pregnant with another. And I hadn't talked to my family, because they, even still to this day, they're practicing SSPX Catholics. And I just didn't feel like I could talk to them. But I started to feel guilty and sad because my grandmother's older and nobody else talks to her. So I had this like guilt, and I'm like, okay, I'll start talking to grandma again, because I have kids. She might die before she gets a chance to meet them. And then I didn't want to have that regret on me. And so I started talking to her, and it was okay the first couple of times that we talked. And then just like every other time after that, we started to talk. She would sneak little things in here and there about religion, until, she started hitting with the heavy hammers and saying things like, well, your kids are going to go to hell because there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church. So you have to, do all of these things, jump through all these hoops and get these sacraments to the children and get them baptized, or they'll perish in eternal fire. And at that point in my life, I was hormonal. I was pregnant. I had been through a lot. I was still young. I wasn't really sure what I believed about, myself, my identity, my part in the world spiritually. And so I really still had that fear of hell, and that fear of, not just me going to hell, like my soul doesn't matter. Whatever I do is fine. But then this idea that I carried the weight of my children's souls on my, shoulders, and that I had to go back and jump through the hoops and do all the rituals and make sure that my kids were a part of the Catholic faith so that they could be saved.
So were you doing it just for your grandmom, or did you kind of feel like you were starting to believe again at that point that it was really like a serious concern?
I was just afraid of hell, and I was more afraid that my children would go to hell than myself. So it
Interesting.
wasn't like necessarily like I believe in all this stuff. It was kind of like I said before, where like you go through the motions and hopefully, you find that faith eventually. Unfortunately for me, it never happened. I never found that faith. I did get all of my children baptized, but I left again before my kids started the Catholicism, the catechism classes or whatever. It just wasn't something that I was comfortable with. And I just like, I don't know, man, I had this like awakening type thing where I'm like, I cannot put my kids through this. I really cannot, tell them that hell is a place and that they were born with sin and that they need to keep doing these rituals, because I just didn't believe it at that point. I think I'd progressed and I've gotten more like, solid in my beliefs and in my identity with the world.
So where would you say you've come to and landed since then? Do you believe in a God still? Like where are you at with everything?
So I am a pagan, and I believe in energy. I believe in spirits. I don't know about God. If a God exists, then I think it's inside of all of us and it's ourselves. And I know that's probably weird and crazy and abstract, but I don't believe in God in the conventional sense as there's like this, almighty sky daddy who punishes people and saves some other people and favors others and doesn't with, creates suffering for other people. I don't believe in God in that traditional sense. So I guess you could say I'm more like agnostic, like maybe something's out there, but I mean, like I said earlier, nobody's reached through the clouds and said like, hey, I'm here.
Yeah. And I'm a lot less weird than the church or whatever painted me to be. I'm a real person, and you can have some sense of verification that you're in the right religion.
Right.
I've often thought too, I'm just putting this out there, and I'd love to hear your feedback, but when you leave, I mean, really leave, not just like drift away, but when you leave, where you're just, I don't believe that in any way anymore. Like my worldview has completely shifted. There's something that happens where even though you could start to add reasons, like someone could say, why did you leave? Well, you could say, well, I've got a bunch of reasons, but I can't really articulate them yet. So you go back and you start to articulate them.
Yeah.
This was the issue and this was the issue. But as much as I am doing that, and I'm going to be doing that hopefully better and better and better over the next few years, there's something that happened to me in my mind and my emotions, my thinking, where you just step back and you think, what was I thinking? Like this whole thing doesn't sound right. And I know that, with just for example, you working with babies a lot as a doula and a pending midwife role, like with the whole idea of a child and genital mutilation, circumcision and all that, you think there's this God of the universe who, you look at this pictures of the stars from Hubble or whatever, I think it's just, he made all this stuff. It's so beautiful. I can't even imagine how big the universe is. I know I can't grasp it. It's too big. But I love thinking about it. And you just get overwhelmed with the beauty of the stars and the galaxies and the universe. And then you think, that when God finally spoke, like he was quiet for all this time, and then he finally spoke, instead of speaking to the whole planet, he spoke to this one little teeny tribe. And one of the first things he says was, take your little boys and cut off the end of their penises. And then he says, for all of you as a tribe, go to this specific teeny piece of land, and anybody that's in it that won't bow their knee to me immediately, kill them all.
Yeah.
Except for the little girls, you can keep those for yourselves. And it's like, you step back and you think, what was I thinking? Like, how did I think that was okay? Did that kind of feeling ever hit you like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, that's a lot of, I think it's trauma processing, if I'm being totally and completely honest. It's a lot of processing that I've had to do, and I've been in therapy for it and that kind of thing. And I really recommend anybody who might be watching this and going through something similar, like talk to somebody. Definitely find somebody who is safe that you can process with, whether that's a friend who's also left, who you can kind of talk with, or if it's some sort of therapist that's not religious based. find somebody to talk to, because I definitely went through a lot of, I think, like unnecessary pain and darkness trying to sort those things out for myself. And it really made me question my life choices, because I did have a really big family, and I'm not a mom. I am a career person. I have a business, and I am not this, traditional Roman Catholic woman who goes to church every Sunday and who is homeschooling all these kids. I'm homeschooling them now, but it's the pandemic. I swear to God, I don't want to do this, but I'm not this Martha Stewart. And so it really made me question, why did I make these choices? And it's not that I don't love my children or I regret having them, but I definitely think that if I wouldn't have been oppressed and formed under these religious ideologies, I probably would have a very different life right now. So that is definitely a lot of trauma. Like I said, a lot of processing that, you have to go through that and understand, like, I made all these choices because of that, and I have to be okay with it now. So definitely, I think that I love all my kids, but I definitely wouldn't have had, all of my children so close together. All my kids are between like 18 and 20 months apart. So none of them are more than 2 years spaced. And that's a lot of stress on your body, and now being in that care provider role and helping to assist with pregnancies and births, I see the toll that it takes on my clients. And I'm here as a healthcare provider advising people, like, wait at least 2 years before you even think about another pregnancy, because your body needs to regenerate, you need to heal. And that wasn't something that I afforded myself. So I definitely, I'm still recovering and healing from having so many kids. And it's been a couple years now since I had my last baby. So I just think that I would have made different choices. And I did have this feeling like, why did I do any of this? Like,
So is the Catholic Church pushing people to have a lot of babies? Is that
the traditional Roman Catholic Church is very strict about it. So the particular sect that I was in, people usually have like, between 8 and 20 kids, like have a lot of kids.
Gotcha. Is that I'm just curious, because I know what I would say from some of the, like the Duggar kind of families on the Protestant side, but is it the idea that you pretty much need to establish the kingdom of God on earth, partially by evangelizing the lost, but also just by having more Christian, little Christian warriors to fill God's kingdom up? Is that the idea behind it?
So marriage is a sacrament, and there are there's like 2 reasons why you would want to get married, and that is to have children and to help your partner, attain whatever spiritual highness or sainthood or whatever it is, heaven, basically. And so there is no other reason to marriage aside from having children. And so the sect that I was a part of even discourages people from getting married if they have infertility issues. So like if you know that you were born with like some sort of physical defect and you can't have kids, or for some reason that you're infertile and you're incapable of having children, it's a big question over whether or not you're allowed to even get married. You have to get a dispensation from like the bishops and stuff. So like it's a really big deal, this idea that you should have a lot of children. And I really do think that a lot of that is just like that, continuing that belief system. And so you're supposed to, as a mother, as a woman, you're supposed to stay home. You're supposed to indoctrinate the children. You're supposed to homeschool them and make sure that they are brought up in this faith the same way that you were, so that they can continue to bring that kingdom here.
That's amazing. It sounds like with what you just said about the infertility issues that some people have, that must be an overwhelming weight just on someone to say, we discourage this marriage just purely because you can't have babies. I mean, I wouldn't have any figures as to obviously how often that happens, but for even if it was just a small percentage, for those people, that is so, I mean, just at face value, my first thought is that is obnoxious to tell someone. Like, what if you just love the person and you just love being close and giving them, the joy of that tenderness and the love and certainly the eroticism of a marriage. Why not?
But that doesn't matter. I mean, because the only point of marriage is to have children. And that's kind of another big source of contention for me, is that I believe for a long time that my friends and my family members who were gay or who were in non-traditional relationships were going to hell, and that there was nothing I could do. And so I had this idea that because they weren't a part of a Catholic marriage, that, I'm sacrificing my soul by even being in contact with them, because you have to do this kind of, proselytizing, like you have to like share your religion with everybody, and if you're not telling people outwardly that they're living in sin, then you're permitting that sin to continue. So, I mean, there's just so much there.
And that dynamic puts us all in a very difficult, even awkward position, because, you know, if you're not a confrontational person by nature, which most of us aren't, thankfully, you know, when you see someone that's doing something that's wrong, you do feel that inner tug of I should say something, because like you said, it's actually, it might not seem loving, but it's actually the most loving thing you could do, pulling back from sin, pulling back from the flames of hell, pulling back from displeasing the Lord. And even though it's a loving thing to do, you also want to be respectful of people's, you know, some people, they need time to think through, like, this isn't a good choice. And they might say, oh yeah, I'll stop doing this bad choice just purely because I got caught, or I'm disappointing people, or I want to, you know, please the priest or my parents. But like some people, they need to go through a process themselves and think, yeah, I want to choose a wiser path, not because anyone's looking, but just because I want to be a wiser person. Like I know with the Amish, I went to Bible college in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of Amish. And they have this thing called, I'm not recommending this, but they have this thing called sowing their wild oats. Have you heard that concept?
No.
They're literally allowed to go do a whole bunch of like really bad things that you'd like Amish people, Amish kids doing
Wow.
this stuff. But once where it gets serious is when you get married. Is once you get married, you know, of course, in the Amish church, then that's when you have to get serious. So you'll literally see these people, but you know, these teenage boys will drive their buggies into town, hitch their, you know, hook their buggies up, you know, securely with the horse and the buggy. They'll go into a garage where they have their own car. That's their car. They'll drive it around town because they're not allowed to have a car. They'll drive it around town, have some fun, get drunk, drive their car back into the garage, get back in the buggy and drive the buggy home. But it's stuff like that like once you get married, that's got to stop. But it's like whatever, you know, that's an extreme example, but like whatever you call sowing your wild oats, there's got to be some level of saying to people, like, you need wisdom, not because people are looking, but because it's time, you know, you have to make good choices. I got to ask too, you mentioned that on one of your blogs, I'm just reading here, looking at some of the words you used. You said, I was part of a cult. What does that mean to you to say that? And to, obviously it didn't sound like a cult when you were probably in it, but what does it sound like now that you're so far removed?
So I didn't realize that I was in a cult, obviously, when I was a part of it, because it's just like that conditioning. And they, you know, raise you to believe that, again, there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church, but because this particular sect is so radical and is so close to the original form of Catholicism, you can't even be saved if you're part of the Catholicism that is under the Pope. So they even say bad things about the Pope, like saying, oh, he's a modernist, or he's like a bad person because he's saying whatever. So I didn't realize I was in a cult until this news article came out, and this was a couple years after I left, and somebody who was a dean or an assistant dean at a college locally was forced to resign early because he had written a book, and in the book it said things like he didn't trust women as much if they wore pants and things like that. And this was like a professor and a dean at a college, so you can imagine the just amount of, you know, misogyny and the opportunities that were not given to his female students because they probably showed up to college wearing pants. And so that really just made me think about, you know, after I had some time removed from that situation, like, wow, this is really not okay. And those things that he said in that book that he wrote, those were things that I grew up just taking at face value. Like, I knew that those things were true. Like, if you're a woman, you have to wear a dress. You can't wear pants. It goes against whatever, you know, the conditions of being a part of this faith and this religion. And therefore, again, that disposes you to be able to go to hell and that kind of thing. So I guess it was when I had that separation, and then I saw like other people calling somebody out who was a part of my you know, ex faith, and saying like, this is not okay. And it's so not okay that you're not allowed to be in a position of power, that I was like, wow, this was really something big that I was a part of, and I'm not happy about it.
With the whole pants thing, I'm just curious, and I don't want to take too many rabbit trails because I know I've taken us down a couple already, but just curious, is there a lot of shame culture in the group you grew up with? In other words, is there a sense of, if you were to wear pants, where maybe, curves were clear, or you're wearing a skirt that's too short or something, or something that's whatever. It's in some way it's too enticing.
Yeah.
Just a sense of you're causing your brethren to stumble. Basically, you're causing the guys that should be focused on God to focus on sensuality or whatever. Is that like the blame? I know there's like the extreme of, well, if a girl was assaulted, it's her fault. I know, and I don't mean necessarily that extreme
Yeah.
interpretation of it, but just the generic shame culture, or even just the personal shame culture, like, don't, if you're tempted to pleasure yourself, or you're just tempted in your thoughts to think about somebody, like that's all bad, bad, bad. Is that
Yeah.
kind of your background too?
Yeah, I definitely think that that really resonates with me. And it was definitely, I think, more like personal. It was more things
Mm.
like that happened in my family. And it was just, you have this certain knowledge and knowing, like if you go to church, you have to be dressed a certain way. Your fingers have to be like your shirt can't be lower than 2 fingers from your collarbone, and your skirt has to be so long past your knees, and that kind of thing. And yeah, people have been chased out, not people, women have been chased out of church for wearing slacks, or for, having a skirt that's too short, or for not covering their head when they walk into the church. So yeah, I think there's a
Mm.
lot of that shame that's a part of that. And it does vary chapel to chapel. I definitely think that it would be wrong of me to say that like everybody is like this, because I do remember one of the last sermons that I was present for at the church here locally. The priest did say, yeah, women have to dress modestly, but men need to have custody of their eyes. And so like
Mm.
I'm in the background like clapping and stuff.
That's
Not
awesome.
really, because it's Catholic and you have to be quiet, but I was really happy to hear all of that, blame or shame culture was not just placed on women, that they're actually like having this conversation in church that, yeah, men, you're a part of this as well. But I do think that kind of ideology definitely prevails in a Christian society, especially among, the traditional Catholics.
Yeah, it's definitely part of a lot of my background too. I think there's some different dynamics going on, probably even since I have become, older. I mean, 44, decide if it's old or not. But, if I was like 20, I think the dynamic would feel a little bit looser with some of this, the restrictiveness of it all. But I think people that are my age or above would say that was very much the way it was. Just, you it's almost like a version, like, with Hasidic Judaism, where they can talk about and nitpick over every little thing, like even just how you prepare food. Like it's
Yeah.
like it's really important, and it does become, it wasn't quite that oppressive with my background, but it becomes this issue where you feel like all these little things are so important and they take up your focus. There's also like you're always focused on who's looking, who's checking out if I'm doing the right thing. And even if that's not really the big deal to you, you're always like, what am I doing that's displeasing God? And did it ever feel to you like, when you were in it, of course, did it ever feel to you like you just couldn't please this deity? Like no matter what you did, he was always kind of looking down at you from heaven and saying, either in a grumpy way or in a really angry way, like, Brittany just isn't towing the line. She's not serious enough about her relationship or about her prayers or rosary. She's not taking modesty seriously enough. She just, or even if you were doing everything right on the outside, like she's just got some, attitude thing that's not really focused on me enough. She's not spiritual enough. Did it feel like that, or did you feel like there were like a good mix of like this guy was kind of happy with you with a brief like, oh, you're doing something wrong, but I'm pretty much happy with you. Like, how did it feel to you? And when you look back on it now, how does it look like on this side of it all?
I don't think that I ever felt like I was the perfect Catholic, but I think that's the name of the game, that we're always like striving to perfection, and we're always striving to not make those sins and to, be a better person or whatever that looks like. So I don't think that I ever reached that pinnacle of perfection. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that God never spoke to me. So I
Mm.
didn't feel as loved as these other people who were saying like, I got this message and I'm supposed to be doing this thing. And I'm just looking at them like, well, nobody ever talks to me. So thanks for cluing me in. So I did feel guilty about that a little bit. Like I don't have this connection. So obviously I'm not as loved as this other person. But I also just felt like there was no way, like there's so much that you have to traverse, if you will, in this method of spirituality to become a saint. And they have all these stories that they read you when you're a little kid that talk to you about the lives of the saints and how these people are so great and how they suffered so much. And I was just like, there's no possible way that I can reach that pinnacle of perfection. And there's no way that God will love me enough. And then when I started questioning my faith, it was just even worse from there, because it was like, I'm not really sure if everything that I've been told is exactly 100% true, but I didn't feel like I had the security or safety to even question that. Like, me questioning even was such a horrifying prospect, because if I question, then that means certainly that I don't have enough faith, and certainly I must be committing some sort of sin. And so you go into the box, the confession box on Sunday, and you confess your sins to the priest and say, Father, I just don't know about all of this, and I just don't know if it's right for me. And they just say, well, here's your penance, do more prayers and read more books, at least 30 minutes a day. And the more that you read and the more ardent and fervent that you'll be, the more that you'll, find that spirituality and you'll have that faith. And kind of like looking back on that now, I think it's crap. I mean, that's the nicest way and the easiest way that I can say it. I just don't, being a mother to many children, I just don't feel like, raising people so that they have to reach this pinnacle of perfection to be worthy to you or to be worthy to God is the way to do it. That's really introducing too much skepticalism, really, and insecurity into people to raise them up to believe like there's nothing that you can do, and you always have to be on the lookout for sin or you will go to hell, and you're not going to be in heaven with me because I'm perfect and I'm your I'm your parent and we're all going to be reunited after I die. So it's just like this whole almost like mind games that they play with you, and it starts at a very young age. And like I said, there's just so much there.
The word mind game, it's interesting choice of words. I love that. That's exactly what it is. And I was thinking too of the idea of control. Like, it sounds like what you're describing is a lot about control.
Yeah.
Keeping people in line with a party line, the interpretation of the world. And it's a kind of a way of keeping people from kind of stepping too far from the traditional path. It sounds like, at least for
even
some of these. Yeah. There's so many things that I think about with this stuff, and it's a bad thing. It keeps me up at night, literally, because I'm thinking both in terms of presentations that I want to make someday, but also just trying to think through it all. And it's there's a lot of layers of this. It's like peeling back an onion, and you just think like right now I'm thinking through a lot and writing down a lot of notes about just like once you've deconverted and you're an atheist like myself, or agnostic like you describe yourself, you step back and you think, okay, so I'm pretty much confident in landing on the idea that this wasn't real.
Yeah.
This God wasn't real. None of this was real. But it's like you step back and you think, okay, so let's do a little post-mortem on this. Let's do a little digging. What does this say about human nature? Human nature in the sense of we have institutionalized mythology, meaning we've got seminaries full of people that are nitpicking on the nuances of this verse and that word in Greek and Hebrew and Latin, and it's all mythology. It's glorified mythology, institutionalized mythology. And just what is it about humans that lets us say, yeah, I'll sign up for that. Like it's almost like you have to step back and say, what's the expression? If someone's kidnapped, Stockholm syndrome, where someone says they kind of got used to and friendly with their kidnapper. It's like you have to step back and you're like, I was really friendly with my kidnapper.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I loved my kidnapper. And you're like, what?
But a lot of us were born into that kidnapped culture. Like a lot of us, I'm what they call a cradle Catholic. So like I was born, raised in it, baptized at a couple days old, and left of my own volition as, a teenager. And I never had that opportunity, because I know there's a lot of people that they like go through life and they're raised with different, whatever, and they come to Catholicism and it's something that they love. And I am so happy for people that find religion and whatever, it makes them happy and it gives them a sense of security. I just don't feel like you should bring especially children into that mindset. And I do feel like children should be free to develop their minds without these oppressive beliefs and ideologies placed on them, because I think it restricts them. You don't know what type of person your children could be if you didn't oppress them and tell them what to think, instead of inspiring their curiosity, kind of like hand feeding them and them drilling it into them and telling them your creativity or your idea of the world is not correct. My view of the world is correct. And if you don't believe my view of the world, then you're not going to be allowed to join the club. In fact, you're going to be tormented. So
it is. And yet God loves you unconditionally.
Yeah.
But it'll burn you if you don't fall in line. What you bringing in the subject of children here, could you tell me again how old are your children, or at least what's the oldest age again?
5, 6, 8, and 9.
And so what do you do to, like, when they have questions, if they have questions, what do you talk about? How do you approach these subjects, especially since you've got family obviously still in it?
Yeah. So a lot of my family, especially the really super conservative religious ones, they're not allowed to talk to my children. And that's been a lifelong decision that I've made. And I do go back and forth on that sometimes, where I think, like, are my children missing something by not having these family members in their life? But ultimately, what I need to do as a mother is to protect my children. And I know that, just through, like I said, going to therapy, that there's so much processing and trauma that I have to undo now because of my upbringing. And so my family's not allowed to be around my kids alone, because I don't want these strange or oppressive ideologies to be introduced to my children. I don't want my children to think that they're going to go to hell. They don't know what sin means. Not even a conversation that we have in our house. But when they do ask hard questions, I never give them an answer. And the reason why is because I don't have answers. And I think that it's easy to give your kids an answer. So it's easy when you say, Mom, why can't I have a piece of candy right now? It's easy to say, because I said so. So I think that a lot of times the framework of religion isn't to tell your kids, because I said so. And when in actuality, it's harder to admit to your kids that you are fallible and that you don't have all of the knowledge, you don't have all of the answers. So when your kids ask you, what happens when you die? Or how did humans get on the planet? Or how are humans even here and created? How was space made? How was the earth made? It's much more difficult to say, I don't know. Maybe you tell me what you think, instead of giving them this idea that, God said bang and then it happened.
It's funny you say that, because it seems like there's a sense of reassurance or peace that Christians kind of claim erroneously, that, like, if you don't have an answer, then it's obviously because you don't know what you're talking about, and you need an answer. That's the implication, is you have to have an answer. And then the final implication is we have it. We know what it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, number one, how do you villainize the position of, just questioning and saying, we don't know where it came from. Yeah. We know, and I say this confidently, we know that it did not come from the biblical God. Yeah. The Yahweh persona that was created, he was a mixture and an amalgamation and an edit, a redaction of other Canaanite gods that were already, Elyon, and Yahweh had a wife named Asherah that got edited out of the story over centuries. Like, we know this isn't real. We know that's mythology. We know it's ancient religion. We know that this universe didn't come from that God. And Jesus claimed to be the same with Yahweh. He said, I and the Father are one. So he's out of the equation too. He's not, this isn't real.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that leaves us with, we don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
And it's really hard when you're used to having the answer. It takes a while to process, just to step back and say, like, almost like you have to take a deep breath and it's like, did I just say this? But I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Big Bang fully explains it all. I don't know where they say, well, where did the Big Bang come from? What happened before that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't imply that the Bible has anything to do with it.
Absolutely.
That just means I don't know. And it's amazing how they preach humility, but there's no humility to say I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. In the conversations I've had with my children, they're just so incredible. And if you're feeding your children the answers, you are missing out on that creativity. You're not even tapping into it. And children are the most magical beings that we have access to on this plane of reality, because they
Yes.
haven't been, raised, and they haven't had trauma beat them down, and they haven't had, religions and schooling and all this stuff to really put their minds in a box. They just exist as kind of like this creative explosion in this bubble. And, if we can tap that, imagine the creativity and the stories and the wonder that our world will be, instead of having, children and then adults who all believe the same thing and who all kill and fight each other over these, religious and political ideologies.
Yeah. This is going to be an aside for a second. I'm going to bring it back to kids. But in the Catholic Church, you all have a lot of what we would call idols or statues. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, they probably wouldn't call them idols, but statues. The Protestants would call them idols, as in a derogatory sense. But there's a lot of pictures for sure of Jesus on the cross, either in stone or on some kind of image. If you were talking to somebody, let's say we had a third person here, and I guess we do in a sense because people might watch this on YouTube, but someone's listening and they're, they see a little bit of value in what we're talking about, but I don't know, we need religion. If you don't have religion, kids are just going to go do bad stuff and not feel like they got to, like, where's their morality come from? It's a big question, how they're going to be moral. And so I want to ask if we had someone else in the room here, and especially like someone that's sensitive, where they're not just like brazen, like, oh, it's my way or the highway, but they're actually like wanting to talk with us and say, tell me more, like what is this why is it so bad? Like, how I get it that there's some bad things that happen, like there are priests that abuse children, there's evangelical Protestant pastors that abuse children and all that, but just mainstream people that have a pretty good experience, they're thinking, kids need to have reverence for the divine, for the amazingness of the universe, and that's God. Mm-hmm. And even if you don't want to be Catholic, like some kind of rules for a society, you can't murder, you can't steal, and they feel like it has to be connected to God. And so I want to paint this picture and bring it into the Catholic Church here. You have a kid sitting in the pew, and kids, of course, are very sensitive to pain. Like, for example, if one of your kids falls down off the bike and the other kid is right there, the one kid's screaming, I scrape my knee, they're crying. Unless there's really some big fight going on, it's natural for the one kid that's not hurt to come over and help the other kid, because they want it. They're like, I feel your pain, I'm sorry, you're hurt. So you take this kid from the youngest age that's sensitive naturally and inherently sensitive to pain, and you sit them in this church, and in front, or somewhere in the church, there's this image of a man who's not just like an image, but he's actually in pain. He's got the nail prints, he's got the crown, the blood, he's got the sword, his side being open from the sword of the Roman centurion. This man is there with his arms outstretched in most extreme pain. And then, of course, you're adding to it the picture that he's not just dying physically, he is taking on your sins in a spiritual, invisible sense. And he's either about to go down to hell, to Hades, or if you believe something else, he's at least going to have this terrible suffering. And then your last word to that kid is, and all that stuff, sweetie, that you see that man is experiencing is because of you. Like, the word that I keep on coming back to is praying, like Prey. You're preying on a child's kindness and their best instincts. How would you help someone that's like, I don't know if this is really that bad, I don't think of this as abusive to a kid. How do you help them get to that threshold and say, this is worse than you're thinking, you're used to it, so it doesn't seem bad, but it's worse than you're thinking?
Yeah, so I think that what you just described is like desensitization, where like these children,
Good
me
word.
too, from a very young age, we do see this violent death cult, if you will. And the reason for the violence is you are the reason why that man is dying on the cross, because you are made from sin. You have original sin. You have to be baptized to be saved, and you have to continue to take the sacraments. And so you become desensitized to this violence because you see it at least every Sunday. And then there's all this discussion too as a child. They talk about why you go to mass, and you go to mass because it's almost like this reenactment of this ritualistic sacrifice of Jesus, or of the Christ. And it's very gruesome, and it's very gory.
Especially with the bread and the wine, right? This is literally the body and the blood.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that people who have been raised in a Christian, society, or in a Catholic religion, that they are very desensitized. And so they might not even understand the gravity or the weight of what they're experiencing, or what they believe, or what they're familiar with. But I just want to combat that with the idea of human empathy. And I think that human empathy is a very hard, abstract topic for a lot of adults. I think that a lot of people don't even truly understand what empathy is. But as you said, children understand empathy. They understand that, oh my gosh, if my brother scrapes his knee, I need to go help him. Children want to be helpful. And I think that's our natural disposition before the world, traumatizes us and all this other stuff happens. I think that naturally children are very empathetic. And this starts around the age of 3. It's just what happens in the brain. And I think that, these things developed when we were cave people. We had to be really empathetic so that we could continue on as a society. We had to help each other out. We had to be community oriented and community minded people. And I don't think the expression of God or the sacrifice of God plays into morality at all. If you can raise your kids to have that human empathy, then there's no need for these rules, because that's really what we're trying to impress on our children. If you're raising them in a Catholic or a Christian household, you want them to have empathy, and you want them to behave so that they don't hurt Jesus anymore. So instead, just take Jesus out of the equation, introduce empathy to your children, introduce topics of consent, like age appropriate, of course, that's how all discussions need to be with children, but just, having kids, making them understand that other people have autonomy, and that when you do things that hurt them, it causes them pain. You wouldn't want yourself to be in pain. And so these are the conversations and the discussions that we have in our household, and they're totally devoid of any kind of religion or ideologies or rules, because I find them unnecessary.
Do you find other kids in the neighborhood or school, at least pre-COVID, that they would hang out with, that were ever trying to paint a different picture? Did you ever have to kind of debrief them?
Damage control.
Damage control because I know as a kid, I'm sure at least once, maybe more than once, I'm sure I talked to kids that, just in a light sense, but just like, no, the only way to, you need to go to heaven, and, Jesus made the way. Do you believe? And it's like, do you ever have kids in the neighborhood or whatever?
Yeah, so my 8-year-old is a very sensitive child. She's so super sweet. And we live in the Bible Belt. We live in Oklahoma. And so everybody is Christian here, like everybody. So going to public school, that's a very big concern for me. And we have had to have a lot of discussions. So, a lot of times my daughter will come home and she'll be like, well, my friends go to church and they say that Jesus created the world and that he died to save us. And I'm like, wow, that's such a cool story. It's so interesting to hear about what other people believe. And then I just introduce the question, like, what do you think about that story? And ultimately, my kids are going to believe what they believe. And some of my kids might grow up and they might be Christian, despite what I'm doing to raise them with an open mind. And I have to be okay with that. That's ultimately what it is. I have to be okay with the fact that my children might find meaning in this form of spirituality that caused me pain.
Yeah.
And so while that's a very scary kind of topic to breach for me, because I still have a lot of trauma and processing that I have to do in my own person to really be okay with it, it is something that I have to be okay with. And so while I would rather my kids never talk to anybody who shares their Christian religious ideologies, it's impossible. You can't shelter your kids, and they're going to have, interactions with other religions. So I just like to keep honest and to have honest conversations with my kids. And a lot of times when we do have conversations, especially about Christian religion, I just ask them, like, does that make sense? Or how do you feel about that? And there's so much power in being able to ask the question, how do you feel, or what do you think about that? And I really think that again, it requires empathy, especially on adults. Adults have to be empathetic and understanding towards children to value them enough to have these conversations with them, instead of, again, just feeding them and telling them this is the answer. Or I could say to them, well, that's stupid and Jesus doesn't exist, and that's just dumb. Your friend's stupid for thinking that. I don't do that because I feel like it's disrespectful, and I want my kids to be able to have open conversations about all things, including about religion and things like that.
I love how you're focusing on letting them, come up with their own thoughts and asking them what they want to, believe, what they think. Because number one, I think it frees them up to have this mindset to say, if something sounds right or not. Like if you're a Christian, we talked about before, you don't have much freedom to say, well, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
God commanding, Joshua to go into Canaan and kill all the, Amalekites or whoever, that doesn't sound right to go kill them all. Kill not just the soldiers, but the moms, the dads, the young boys, even sometimes the babies and the young girls. That doesn't sound right. And like the freedom to say, this sounds right, this sounds wrong. And you're empowering kids. You're really saying you can pull that power to say, I will choose what I want to believe. And if, like, for example, the Bible has a lot of passages about slavery. It says, and it's not talking about indentured servitude or something where you're just paying off a debt. It's like, it's hardcore slavery. It says you can beat your slaves hard. As long as they don't die, you're fine. You can beat them hard, and you can bequeath them to your children because they're your property. You can give them away. And so you're talking about hardcore slavery. And for a kid to say, it doesn't sound right. You're saying, well, little boy, little girl, if you say that doesn't sound right, you're putting yourself above this God.
Yeah.
And you're saying to kids, exactly, I am giving you I'm talking you through you have the freedom to say, I'm better than your God. And to a lot of Christians, of course, that's blasphemy, how dare you? But it's the truth. You have to have that freedom to say, I can make your Bible better by just saying, don't own people, period.
Yeah.
There, I just made your Bible better than your God. And that empowerment to kids is so vital. I do want to ask you, as you're having these conversations with kids, and just a few more questions here. I know we've been going for a while, but do they ever ask about the afterlife, and what do you tell them about that?
Yeah, definitely. And so we had 5 children, and my youngest child passed away this summer, unfortunately. Really horrible accident.
I'm so sorry.
It's really hard. I can't lie and tell you, like, this is easy, and it's just unimaginable. You never you think about having kids when you're a little kid and you're like, oh, I'm going to be a mom. You never think about what it would be like to lose one of your children. So that is totally it's been unimaginable. And what's really honestly been the worst about it is I've been through something that's really horrible, but my children lost their baby, they lost their baby sister. So that has been a really hard process to walk with these other small children, all under the age of 10, through this process of grief and through this process of death, and understanding, what happens. Our sister was here, and then she was not, and we got to see her body, but she wasn't like we saw her, when she was alive. So there definitely has been a lot of conversations about that. And nobody has asked where she is, but they all have their different understandings about what happens in the world. And like I said, I do not give my kids we're going to meet our baby in heaven someday. That's not what I've done. I just kind of have had, again, open and honest discussions. Well, what do you think happens? And so one of my sons said, well, I think that after she dies, she'll come back again. And we were talking to a therapist, and the therapist says, so do you think she'll be like another person, or like a butterfly or a cat? And my son's like, I don't know. Kids don't really have like a lot of hardcore, like, beliefs and ideologies about what happens. And I don't want to give them that because I honestly don't know. I haven't died yet. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'll ever see my baby again. And that is the reality that we have to sit with as a family. So practically, we do things like honoring her. We have like an altar set up in our like our living space. So we've got pictures and we've got her toys and things like that, so we can honor the memory of her being alive. But in terms of afterlife, I mean, it's just the same. It's just adopting this mindset of curiosity and of questioning, and really having open conversations with your children, instead of me feeding them this idea that there's some supreme being that will reunite everybody after we all die. It's more like having this conversation of, the baby is not here with us, and I don't know where she's at. And that is very hard. That's a very hard conversation to have with children, but it's an honest one. So I know that I'm doing the best thing for my children, for my family, because I'm not lying to them. And I don't want to give them a false hope of, them someday being reunited, or something happening that I'm just not sure of.
Yeah, well, those are some hard topics. But I commend you for how you're handling that. That's really good. I think it's just as a quick side note, I'll move on to the next topic, but I suspect that for some people who deconvert, where everything was, it was all real, very real to them, that when they hit that point where like they finally are willing to admit this wasn't real. And that's hard. It took me, I don't know how long, because what you like, I know some people say they don't know the day. I know the day, like it was like a specific hour. But when you look back, when you think, in a sense, it was building up, like there was a bunch of seeds planted and it built up. And then finally, it was like a pressure cooker, and finally it just blew up. I deconverted in an hour, and it just felt like, just like, it was too much. It was too much, but it was good. All the stuff that I kind of wondered about, it just flooded in quickly. I was like, yeah, it's like I was holding it back for a while, and holding it back pretty successfully for at least a year or two. And at least a good solid year for sure, maybe two, but just saying, yeah, admit it. You've almost been saying it to yourself. This hasn't been real. But I think when you get out of it and you get on the other side, a lot of people are obviously sad, because they feel like, I thought I was going to live forever.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to happen anymore, most likely. But also just that it's like a double whammy, like all this stuff, you get the one whammy of like, this wasn't real. I thought I was talking to God. I was talking to the wall. But then it's like this double whammy of all these beautiful dreams. And it's like, you don't want to deprive humanity of the idea to create mythology, to create beauty, to dream. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the Robin Williams movie, What Dreams May Come. Did you ever see that one?
I've not seen that.
I would highly recommend it. It's very emotional, but it's a picture basically that his wife was a very skilled painter, and she would paint these huge landscapes. And so when he gets to heaven, his heaven is basically her pictures come to life. But it's called What Dreams May Come, and it's not a particularly religious movie, but it's I found some interesting dynamics to it, and it's very, very well done. But just it's good to dream about good things, and about especially if someone like has cancer and is in pain, you just think, how beautiful would it be to see them running again at full speed in a field full of flowers and sunshine pouring through. Beautiful dreams. But
it reminds me of the book by John Steinbeck of Mice and Men, where you have these two men, and the one man is the caretaker for the larger man who has some disabilities, and the man ends up committing a horrible crime. And before his caretaker kills him, because everybody in the town is after this guy for this horrible act that he did, before his caretaker kills him, he tells him this beautiful story about, they're going to buy this land and they're going to live off the land and they're going to have the rabbits and it's just going to be this picturesque, perfect life. And then he takes the person's life because that is the best way that he can protect this man now. And I think that it's okay. It's okay to dream, and it's okay. And that's what I'm allowing my children to do by having these open and honest conversations. I was not afforded that growing up. I was not allowed to dream and to build my own stories or to open up my own world of curiosity. And now I'm spending the rest of my lifetime trying to figure out how to dream again. And I don't think it's bad. And I definitely, I'm so for religion. If it helps you and you're not hurting anybody, go for it. I just wish that more Christians were open-minded and were not, didn't have this ministry mindset or, this idea that they have to save everybody in the whole world. I just wish that more people were able to be open-minded, have conversations, and just let people live,
Yeah. And I would just add, I think it's in that process, it's almost like you're learning to grieve that all these dreams of what you were so sure was exactly how it's going to play out in the future. It's like you have to go through this grieving process, not just that the God you thought was there isn't there, but all these extra dreams that aren't God, but that they were still very much connected to him. They're not going to happen either. And it's almost like you have to kind of let these waves hit you of some of its depression, some of its healing, just plain old healing. But it's like you just have to let it sink in. And then I don't have conversations quite the way we're doing that often. I'm usually focused on like a subject of how Christianity was formed or something, but I love to just say to people, it's going to be okay. If you're still in the midst of it, if you're out of it, it's going to be okay. It's going to be better because you escaped a cult. But if you're still in it, it's going to be painful. If you're still really in it and you're just starting to study the origins of Judaism and Christianity, and you're about to discover this wasn't what you thought it was at all, either the Bible or the whole story, none of it was what you were told. It's going to be painful, but it's going to be okay. And it's okay to grieve. It's okay to, let these dreams, let it hit you what happened, to reflect on it. But then to as the healing begins to take place, it's like you're beginning to be human again. In the Matrix where Neo, have you seen the Matrix?
Yeah.
Nowhere like Neo, he's just been in the real world, he's been pulled out of his pod. Yeah. And he's kind of in this, coma for a couple of days or whatever. And they've got all these little needles in him to try to rebuild his muscles. And the first time he opens his eyes, and they of course have this bright light in his eyes, but he's like, "Why do my eyes hurt?" Oh, yeah. And Morpheus is like, "You've never used them before."
Yeah.
And it's like, you've never been really human before. You've been human with this whole structure that blinded you, and now you're finally free to be human. And it sounds like you're giving your kids that gift right from the start, which I gotta say, I'm in awe. It's such a great gift to give to kids, to just empower their humanization right from the start.
Yeah, give them the ability to share their own stories.
Yeah, I wanted to finish by asking about going back a little bit. This is a step back a little bit, but and then I'll end with actually two questions. Stepping back for a second, blood magic. You mentioned the word death cult.
Yeah.
For people that are in it, they're going to say, no, it's not a death cult. That's a gross misrepresentation. And they're going to say, no, it's not blood magic. That's misrepresentation.
Yeah.
Once you get out of it, you're like, yeah, it was blood magic. It was a death cult. Have you ever had conversations, or if you just imagine them, how do you imagine helping people to see for lack of a better word, the insanity of blood magic and of scapegoating, to add to that, and of death cult? How do you get people to see this as this beautiful religion? It's like it's a blood death cult.
Yeah. So the religion of the Mesoamerican people, the Maya and the Aztecs, all of that, they had a religion very similar to Catholicism. It was a messianic religion where they had this Messiah figure who, was was a prophet and died and was resurrected. There's so many similarities there, and I think that as somebody who's probably interested in studies religion, you probably see that a lot, where there's similar mythologies, if you will, amongst these religious practices.
Yeah.
But they partook in blood magic as well, and their blood magic looked like ritual sacrifice, where they would literally cut people and bleed them. But I think that it's a very similar thing. And so if you can help people understand other religions, and especially help Christians understand that their messianic religion is not the only one, and that there are so many other messianic religions, and then other religions that perform blood sacrifices. Like, it is literally the same thing. In magic, the only thing that is important is your intent. So the intent of Christians is, or Catholics anyways, is to perform this blood ritual every Sunday and on holy days of obligation, where you transmute this wine into the blood of Christ, and then you consume it. It is no different than the Aztecs or the Mayans. It's very gruesome. And if you were to explain it to like one of my children who have never heard anything like that, they would be like, ew, that's really gross. Because It's very strange. And I just think that, again, people don't have enough separation. So they don't have this separation because they were raised in it. And so it's just normal. It's kind of like, it would be like if, we transported ourselves into Aztec society, we would be like, wow, this is too much for me. But that's because we weren't brought up in it. So I think that there is this familiarity that people have. It helps them, process or to accept or to be desensitized to how gruesome it really is. But I think that just like comparative religions and helping people understand different cultures can hopefully help them make that leap to understand that what they're practicing isn't so different from what a lot of other people have practiced in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've not honestly studied the Mayans like you have, but I know I could add to it the Egyptians were practicing the blood ritual, blood magic, and I know that they were also doing things like circumcision, which that was right there in the same part of the world. I from what I understand, a lot of that probably came from Egypt and from some of the other surrounding cultures. Even less weird things like the Sabbath. There were cultures hundreds, if not thousands of years before the Jews were talking about the Sabbath that were already talking about the Sabbath, even had very similar sounding words. I wanted to kind of ask to end this with, I asked you before, how much peace did you have? You said I didn't really have peace when I was in it. What is life like now that you're on the outside? Because there's always going to be someone that's going to be fearful. Certainly even, hyperventilating, like I can't even imagine life without Christ or religion or something. Could you paint the picture? What is life like without the God of the Bible? What is life like without religion? Just what does your life look like? And then maybe to add to it as a final thought, what would you tell someone who's kind of on that fence of saying, I'm really afraid of these discussions. These aren't happy thoughts. This maybe for very even worse reasons that we've talked about, like maybe a spouse is still stuck in it. It's like, this is going to be really nasty if I tell my spouse I don't believe anymore, or a parent, or some other reason, lose my job. Maybe they're in ministry. They're like, I'm actually working for a church. If I admit this, I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah.
How do you talk to people who are realizing? I mean, there's people that the whole spectrum, but how do you talk to people that are realizing this is actually mythology? This isn't real. How do you talk them through it? So first, what's your life like right now as a non-Christian, as a non-Catholic? And then how do you finish up by just telling people, where do they go if they're kind of thinking you might have actually tripped onto something that's actually very necessary for them to think through too?
Yeah. So I just want to say that my life is very peaceful now. I don't have this constant stress or fear that if I do the wrong thing, that I'm going to burn for all eternity. It's just that weight has been lifted from my shoulders. It is very hard to interact with people who still follow that, belief system or ideology, because again, I understand, because I came from that inside viewpoint that when they see me, they have a lot of grief and sadness because they think that I just don't understand, or that if I could feel the love of God or of Jesus, that, my life would be different and that I would have peace, or I would have what they have. And I just want to say that I'm really happy. And, to bring my experience with losing my baby, my daughter, it's an unimaginable experience, but I would never want to walk through it with the strings of religion, because there's so much there with what they believe in terms of this is what happens when you die, or if you die under these conditions, these certain things happen. And I would not want to be going through the grieving process under somebody else's terms or under somebody else's belief system. As I walk through this grief with myself and with my children, it's on our own terms. We don't have to perform anybody else's rituals or do anything else to please some sort of religious or cultural hierarchy. We're grieving in our own way, with our own methods and with our own rituals and with our own mannerisms of being able to honor my daughter and her life. So we don't have those strings tied down onto us. We had a service for my daughter that was beautiful, and it was led by a very close friend and by myself. And we were able to prepare my daughter's body and send her off for cremation in a way that was very honoring and very respectful. And that's how I wanted it done. And my family, my children, my husband, we all feel very, as happy as we could be with the way that we sent her off. And I know that I would not feel okay personally, and everybody's got their own personal beliefs, but I wouldn't feel okay personally with knowing that my daughter is in the ground somewhere decaying. The idea of that just was so horrific to me. And that is one of the things, again, that, Catholics believe you're not allowed to get cremated, or it goes against, you can't be resurrected and the final judgment comes, or something silly like that. So I didn't have to follow anybody else's ideologies while walking through this unimaginable process. And I think that it's not right, and it's unfair to believe that people would have to follow some sort of way of living or way of grieving because that's what their religion dictates. So I do want to just share with people that I have walked through something unimaginable, and that I don't have regrets. I don't have regrets in the way we laid our daughter to rest, and I don't have regrets in the way that we're living right now. I really feel at peace with myself, even with, a situation so unimaginable. And then, to anybody who's kind of, maybe on the fence, or they're still practicing, or they have questions, the answer always is just sit with yourself. And I don't think that life is comfortable. I think that life is very uncomfortable. There's a lot of unknowns. And I think religion provides us with this safety and this security blanket, because all of the answers are given to us. God is love. And if we do the right things, then we're going to meet him for all eternity. And it's great. And we don't have to think about anything. You have to think about a lot if you don't have this religious ideology that kind of guides you on your path. You have to sit with the idea that life is uncomfortable, that we die, that we don't know what happens after we die, and that we don't have the answers. So just learning to sit with that uncomfortableness, I think, is a very important part of transitioning away from religion. And I think that it's an important part, and it's a necessary part of being human. Our life is not comfortable. I think that if there is a hell, it's probably this existence where we, come to live on this earth, and we watch our loved ones leave us with no explanation. That's a really cruel existence, I think. And yet we're all sitting here with this kind of like existential dread, knowing that life happens with or without us. We're all going to die someday, and nothing is certain. And until you can sit with yourself and be okay with those uncertainties, I think you're going to have a lot of dissonance in yourself and in your spirit and in your body. And the answer, I think, to peace, or at least to the peace that I have found, is being comfortable in change, and being comfortable and not knowing.
Yeah, I love how you put that in it. I feel like it just adds up to, as you get healthy, like take the healthiness that you find and just make life count.
Yeah.
You said we don't know what's happening next, whether we get 4 days, 4 years, or 40 years in front of us or more. Whatever time you've got, leave this planet better than you found it. And give, like, I love how people like you, and I certainly hope I'm doing this as well, but just give the next generation a better chance at reality,
Yeah.
at healthiness, at true joy, and at even true goodness. I know people keep getting stuck up on how can you be moral without a God, but to give your kids the gift to say you can be really good, not because you're trying to get a present or a reward from heaven. You're not trying to get out of hell. This isn't about carrots and sticks. You can be good just because you have the power to do so. You can just choose to love people just because you want to, not
Yeah.
for any fear or reward. And just, I love seeing parents see that, like, there's a lot at stake here.
Yeah.
You think, I mean, when you really think about it, for someone like myself, speaking for me, I feel like a lot of life was lost.
Yeah.
Not that a lot of wonderful things didn't happen. I met a lot of good people on the way, but you feel like you wasted a lot of time in something that was not real. And
Blinders on.
blinders on, and worse. And then you feel like I can take whatever time I've got left, and I can give my kids the joy of knowing a life that's free of that stuff. That's free of mythology, and honestly, some really nasty mythology.
Yeah.
Free of it, and that joy of life. And I love it. I love it, and I hope that people like you can kind of get like the contagiousness of this, not in a COVID sense, obviously, but in a loving sense. Like just to spread the love of
Yeah.
the joy of life. And I think some people truly, they can't see it. Some people listen to this, and say, I don't see it. I would need God to be that happy.
Yeah.
And granted, some people aren't ready, just like in the drone. I hate to quote it again, but the Matrix, some people aren't ready to be unplugged, and that's okay. Everyone's it took me 43 years to escape. Could I have easily escaped earlier? I probably had more than enough information to have escaped earlier. Yes.
Yeah.
Something about me wasn't ready. Everyone's got to have their own timetable, but
Yeah, and you can't have regrets.
you can't. Yeah.
And I feel like the whole basis of that kind of, organized religion is that you obey so that you're saved. And so if you have any regrets, I had regrets and I was uncertain of myself the first time I left when I was a kid. I mean, that's why I stepped back into that religious ideology, is because I just wasn't sure. And so I definitely think that, there's no harm in going to church every Sunday, even if you don't believe. And when you're ready to step away and beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is not what you're going to do, then you can make that choice in good confidence. There's no rush. You've done it for however long you've done it in your life. And so there's no timeline or anything like that. Just do the thing that makes sense to you and don't live your life with regrets, because you're right. We don't know how much time we have left here.
Yeah. I love, I haven't seen your kids obviously, but I know with my kids, they have sparkles in their eyes every day. And I love the idea of being able to give them a life where those sparkles just flourish. I mean, that's what this is about. We're painting different pictures and talking about different aspects, but it's basically about how do you flourish? How do you thrive?
Yeah.
And some of these, as some of these shackles get taken away, we're giving the next generation a way to thrive, hopefully even better than we can. So awesome thoughts. Well, Brittany, I appreciate your sharing your story. You've shared just some time. Some of it's just been a timeline, but some of it's been some really painful stuff, and I'm very sorry for what you've been through. I appreciate your being willing to share a few pieces of that with us. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name at the beginning. I appreciate your graciousness with that, but I definitely hope your voice gets bigger in this, and I know you're touching a lot of people. It sounds like you're touching babies' lives, you're touching moms and dads and families, and I hope as you interact with them and they interact with you, just that the way that you bless people just increases. And thank you so much for what you're doing in all these discussions.
Thank you, Tim. It was so wonderful to talk to you today. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We'll hopefully do it again soon.